From the Godrej DEI Lab, welcome to India Included. Here is your host, Parmesh Shahani.
Hi to my lovely fans and listeners all over the universe, from outer space, from everywhere. I'm Parmesh Shahani from the Godrej DI Lab. Thank you so much for all your letters. Some of you still send letters, or your pictures, your DMs. And to the last DM, no, darling, I cannot marry you because my partner won't like that. But please continue to listen to this podcast. No, I still love you. It's very good, even if I say so myself. And that's the funda of what this episode is about: goodness. Now, anyone who does DI will tell you, diversity and equity is good for business. Our friends at McKinsey regularly put out reports with numbers that show how the case for growth and the case for workplace inclusion go hand in hand. So basically, if you're the type of business leader who thinks that DI is fluff, or that it gets in the way of your bottom line, or that it's all fuzzy social service stuff, then you're very last century. Now, I'm not saying this, the well-paid consultants are, so please listen to them. Now, we know enough consultant jokes. Now, how many consultants does it take to change a light bulb? 4. How many consultants does it take to make a business case for inclusion? All of them are making it, so let's listen to them. But maybe you're not that kind of leader. Maybe you come from a society and a market that values respect and generosity, and you live in a state that's publicly committed to equality and social justice. Maybe you work at an organization like the Godrej Industries Group, which was founded in the Swadeshi movement and for 127 years has believed that doing good business also means doing good for society. In this case, thinking of DI is natural to you, and the fact that it also makes business sense is a bonus. My guest today leads an organization that works on these big picture questions around goodness. He's also a business owner himself. That makes him uniquely well placed to observe how business concerns and social concerns overlap. Anant Ahuja is the head of ESG and Sustainability at Shahi Exports, the largest exporters of apparel in India, and it's a firm founded by his grandmother. He's also the co-founder of the astonishing Good Business Lab, a research organization dedicated to studying and advocating for worker well-being. So Anant, welcome to our recording studio. I believe this is not an unfamiliar habitat for you. I believe you have a side hustle as an independent music artist. Do you want to start off by telling all our guests about that?
Yeah, sure. That's my night shift, working in the studio, making music. And I've been doing it actually even longer than I've been doing Good Business Lab in Shahi in some sense. I started composing music when I was in maybe grade 8 or grade 9.
And can we listen to it?
We can listen to it. I mean, all the listeners should go on Spotify, search Mad Star Bass, check out the music we've made. A lot of it is hip-hop or rap music or dance music as well, electronic music. And we put out a project a long time ago where we took a bunch of classic Bollywood songs, remixed them so that, they could fit in a DJ set that included hip-hop and other kinds of music. So now they're on Spotify and all the streaming platforms. So
wow, Anant, and we have people in our studio holding their hands over their mouths and ears saying, oh my God, this is Mad Star Bass. So I'm sure after listening to this podcast, which has millions of viewers, your fan base will increase even more.
That'd be great.
But when you're not being a musician, how would you describe the work you do?
First of all, I think music is something that actually unites me and my other co-founders as well. So I have 2 co-founders, and the 3 of us started an organization called Good Business Lab.
Yeah.
And Good Business Lab is labor innovation and research company. Essentially, our aim is to build the business case for worker well-being. And we do that by showing to businesses the impacts of these programs.
Yeah.
Just as a side point, the other 2 co-founders are great musicians as well, multi-instrumentalists, vocalists. So when we're not doing research and studying worker well-being, we are finding time to get in studios like this and compose and create original music.
You studied political science in Pennsylvania, then Shahi Exports, which is our country's largest exporter of
Apparel,
garments, which your grandmother actually started as well. So, A, why study political science? And B, were you always destined then to come back and take over the family business? Take us through that journey.
Like you said, my grandmother started our family business, it's called Shahi Exports. We're a contract manufacturer. We manufacture apparel, textiles, meaning to say fabric, as well as, clothing and ready-made garments, all for export pretty much. So we export to large brands and retailers, all the global ones you can think of. And when I got into college, I didn't have any intention specifically to come join the business when I came back. I was really going into college with a sort of no clear direction on what I was going to do. But I realized when I was there that in terms of, the subjects I study, I should do things that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think that I was really drawn towards the political science department because they had great faculty. I don't think I was actually exposed to a lot of the topics that we discussed in poli-sci in my high school. Growing up. Yeah, exactly.
Studies are so different, right?
Very different.
Yeah.
And just the lens and, the approach to studying these topics, right? But I will say I also did study economics.
Yeah.
So it was nice to be able to understand the world from the political sort of perspective, but also understand the economics behind how the world works and so on.
How was your grandmother like while growing up?
So,
it's pretty unique, right? To have a woman matriarch. Most family businesses are started by men.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, she's a special person for sure. I mean, growing up, to me, she was my grandmother, so I didn't really understand what all she was doing to build a business like this. But now, when I talk to her and now we're trying to document a lot of the process of how she built the company. This year is actually Shahi's 50th year. So,
oh my God, happy birthday.
Happy birthday to Shahi. Happy 50 years. So 50 years ago, she was actually not working in a formal paid job. She was obviously working a lot to run her home, similar to many Indian women, in today's world.
Yeah.
And, my dad and uncle, they were getting a bit older, so they were in school, and she thought, okay, now I have a bit of time. Let me try to earn some money for the family.
Yeah.
And so as a kid, she learned how to sew.
Yeah.
Her mom taught her. So she said, let me join the local garment factory.
Yeah.
That factory was actually headed by a woman as well, I found out recently. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
So you're like tracing this history while
Yeah.
So it's very good. Yeah.
So she joined the factory. And I think while working there, she didn't spend too much time, but she realized pretty quickly that it was hard for her to manage the home and be in this, job for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And my uncle, her younger son, was getting in trouble, skipping school.
Yeah.
So she thought, no, I shouldn't do this. She told the factory head, hey, listen, I'm sorry. I think I have to leave this job.
Yeah. Yeah.
The factory head was like, hey, actually, your stitching skills are really good. Why don't you take some orders and work on them from home?
Wow.
So the flexibility allowed her to manage, things much better. But the work kept increasing. And then at some point she's like, hey, why don't I get some help from my neighbors and the people around?
Yeah.
So she started going door to door, asking the other women in her neighborhood, like, hey, come work with me.
Yeah.
And the home that the family lived in turned into like a workshop.
Yeah.
The early years were like that.
Yeah.
And then at some point they established an actual factory. And 50 years later, we have, some 50 plus factories spread across India.
Yeah.
These factories employ over 100,000 full-time workers, mostly women.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting industry in terms of the role this has in the development story of nations, right? Like how we bring people into formal sector jobs, in particular women.
Yeah. That's amazing, Anant, and congrats, your grandmother, the entire family, and indeed all these 100,000 employees who are benefiting from, this idea and this hard work of the past 50 years must be so proud. But there must be something in her, right? Because there were many women who were working and bringing work home, but only one of them, like your grandmother, had the vision to imagine something bigger and scale that up. So was she always so ambitious, and did she always imagine that it would be a place where women would predominantly be employed and rule?
I mean, it's a story of organic growth, right?
Yeah.
50 years later,
Yeah.
it's achieved this size.
Yeah.
And I think when she was building it, she definitely wasn't imagining being the largest exporter of garments in India, this scale, 100,000 people.
Yeah.
What I've learned from that is anything you put your heart, your mind into and do with full dedication, if you don't do it expecting to achieve a certain level and you just do it because you enjoy it or because it's adding value, I feel like that's the way to grow to unimaginable levels. But I will say, to your second part of your question, I do think one of the legacies of Shahi has been to promote employing women in these jobs. I think that mindset has been something she's kind of passed on. And I think now what we've really tried to focus on more is how do you create high quality jobs, right?
Correct, yeah.
You don't want to bring 100,000 people into workplaces and then expose them to harassment or shouting or
a lack of safety, physical.
Lack of safety, poor working conditions, which, often people think of when they think of the garment sector. So I'm definitely really proud of what the companies achieve, but I'm also very motivated to work on all these problems and try to reduce the negative impacts and maximize the positive ones.
Yeah, when I met you last at the UN conference, you showed some amazing images and spoke about, some of the practices which are not rocket science, but we wish other people did, right? Like having sanitary pad dispensers in every factory that are accessible with biometrics, and that just being able to measure usage, but also how much the presence of that facility and its usage leads to, more well-being, more productivity and things like that as well, right? So it's really amazing how you've been able to do these small tweaks and then, really, really take Shahi ahead, but also then become an exemplar for others. So tell me about some of these innovations you've done at Shahi. And I would imagine that working on these made you think about the larger ecosystem and then co-found Good Business Lab, right?
Yeah. I mean, my journey at Shahi began in, let's say, close to the end of 2012.
Yeah.
I was actually really drawn to the work that was happening in the company because of the development potential that I saw, right? Like all these people were coming to our factories for daily work. And then there were already some interesting programs even back then. So the first program that really drew my attention, it's called the PACE program. It stands for Personal Advancement and Career Enhancement. So what the PACE program was trying to teach to women in the factories was what they call soft skills or life skills.
Yeah.
Communication, time management, problem solving, financial literacy were some of the modules. But I think what was novel, especially at the time, was garment factories were not training their workers in this, right? But they often weren't training them in these sort of general or life skills. Maybe even thinking that if we train them in these skills, they can go and get a better job, right? They'll leave our factories.
Yeah.
So one of Shahi's customers is Gap, the clothing brand.
Yeah.
And they have been a pioneer when it comes to the space of worker well-being in supply chains, right? They said, let's move beyond the usual compliance and auditing and let's try to create some positive impacts. But they were really looking at this program from a, I guess you could say, philanthropy or, CSR perspective.
Yeah.
They weren't seeing it as a business tool.
Correct.
And that's when, so we had Ach and the other Anant, who are the other GBL co-founders.
Yeah.
They came to Shahi. I was connected to them because they both were at UPenn as well, at the same university, a couple years ahead of me.
Yeah.
They're both PhDs in economics.
I see.
So they're development economists.
Yeah.
And they wanted to see our factories and they saw the PACE program. They saw the scale of what was going on and they're like, wow, this is really cool. But they also saw some of the challenges that the business had. So at that time, Shahi had 60,000 workers.
Yeah.
Now it's, like I said, 100,000, but even 60,000 was really large operation. But these factories, every month, 10% of the workforce was leaving.
Yeah.
So
attrition, huge problem.
Really high attrition. I mean, if 10% a month means that in a year, your whole workforce is even more is being refreshed.
Yeah.
Now, if you're HR and you're responsible for replacing this workforce, that's not fun. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, but also you're not invested then in training and keeping them because you imagine
that they're... When we spoke to a lot of people, it sounded like they were kind of just like accepting that this was a reality they would live with.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking of it as like, hey, there's an opportunity to do something.
Yeah.
So they saw the PACE program and they were kind of like, if Shahi's been doing this program for the 5-6 years and they've graduated, I think at the time it was 10,000 women in the program.
Yeah.
There must be some value to the business.
Yeah.
And maybe it's impacting things like the attrition numbers, the attendance, the productivity.
Yeah.
So they're like, hey, there's a way we can test this and create some evidence. And that way is a randomized controlled trial.
Yeah.
So the way I could explain this, for people who aren't too familiar with the concept, you select a sample size and randomly choose within that sample size who gets the intervention.
Yeah.
So with PACE, the intervention was a training.
Yeah.
So we had a group of 3,000 workers who volunteered, who said, hey, I want to do this program.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, 1,500 will be selected to be part of the training for this year.
Yeah.
And the rest, you'll be part of the next cohort.
Yeah.
And so we did it for 8 months, the program. We're tracking both the treatment group and the control group. And the other thing I can say, which is really cool about the garment factory setting, there's a lot of data that we collect. And one of the pieces of data is productivity.
Yeah.
So in a garment factory, each worker has a target.
Correct.
Let's say your target is 100 pieces.
Yeah.
Now, your output or your efficiency would just be however many you produced against your target. So 80 out of 100 or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to do this experiment in a corporate setting or somewhere else,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have that kind of clear productivity data. But that lets us learn a lot of really interesting things.
Yeah.
And what we learned from the PACE experiment was that it provided a 20% boost to productivity.
Wow.
And this is a program that wasn't designed as a business tool, right?
No,
It was just like, Gap was actually like, let's invest in women, because by investing in women, you invest in society and communities, right?
Yeah.
And we were actually able to say, what's the ROI of doing this program, right? If it costs Shahi X to do it, how much does Shahi make back? And the number was surprising. I think we were over 250% ROI.
Wow.
So then that becomes your evidence to then go back to your leadership and say, hey guys, let's do this everywhere. And Shahi's actually done that. So after the results came in, we went back to the Shahi leadership and we said, look at these results. They're incredible.
Yeah.
Today, Shahi has graduated 90,000 women in the program.
Yeah.
And Gap also, at first a bit reluctant for us to do this experiment.
Yeah.
But when we came back with the results, and again, this program had huge impacts and huge ROI, much more than what we expected. Then they made a commitment to take the PACE program to 1 million women. So I think they're either close or they've crossed that target now.
Yeah.
And I think the evidence on the impacts was definitely a big driver for the scale up of the initiative.
And that's what we hear all the time, right? Because leadership wants to believe that there's a business case, not just that this is a good thing to do. So you were able to actually demonstrate.
That research experiment we did was before we had set up the lab.
Yeah.
But when we did that and a few other things, we realized like, wow, there could be a whole lab just studying this kind of work.
Yeah.
But one thing I can kind of make the distinction of is that as Good Business Lab, obviously our work is focused on improving the lives of workers.
Yeah.
But the way we do it is by convincing businesses to invest in workers.
Yeah.
Right? Like if we're saying, hey, you should do your job. You should continue maximizing profits.
Yeah.
But there's a way to do that through investing in the development of your workforce.
Because most companies still think of this as a trade-off. And what you're saying, it's not a trade-off, it's a win-win.
I don't blame companies, right? Like the classical approach to this is to say
Economics,
maximize your profits, minimize your costs.
Yeah.
And in the garment sector, for example, 30% of your cost is wages.
Yeah.
But I think the shift in thinking is workers are not just a cost.
Yeah.
They're actually your most valuable asset.
Yeah.
The same way your machinery is, or whatever.
Or your designers. Or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you invest in developing them.
Yeah.
and don't just view it purely as a cost.
Yeah, well, I'm glad the experiment worked out because then you could scale it out of Shahi and set up GBL. And GBL works with companies across, right? It started with Shahi, but it serves
I mean, a lot of our early work was with Shahi, and even now we have some great programs which I tell you more about. But the idea of GBL is definitely to work across industries, across geographies, really any labor-intensive organization.
And not just women in manufacturing, but labor in general.
Yeah. I think here, there is an emphasis on supporting women in India, but, in other parts of the world, there's other maybe, more local challenges that we would focus our work on.
Is it also to perhaps reimagine the future of work altogether?
I think that we tend to think of development being led by NGOs or governments or charity organizations.
Yeah.
But there's a huge role that businesses can play.
Yeah.
Right? Because firstly, I mean, just think about the fact that by Shahi's workforce of 100,000 people, right? There's 100,000 people that show up at the factories every day.
Yeah.
So you save your mobilization costs.
Yeah.
The other thing is that because they're spending 8 hours a day in a factory, it's an opportunity to learn about them and what challenges they have, and then design the right solutions. So I think if businesses start to realize doing this is going to help them further their goals, and all of those realizations, I think, get put into action, that's when you can drive so much positive impact through private sector.
Yeah. Why do you set it up in Bangalore?
Bangalore is like a second home at this point. Shahi has a lot of their factories there. I think out of the 50, 40 are in Bangalore.
Okay, wow. And now your team is all across. The Good Business Lab team is across the country.
They're everywhere,
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you grew out and scaled, and how do you decide which projects to pursue now that you're growing so fast? And there are so many pressing issues in the Indian labor force. What do you focus on? What are you focusing on now?
Yeah. Now we're doing a lot of different interventions. There's a bunch around health.
Yeah.
So physical health, such as vision or eye health, is an area we've worked on. Iron deficiency is really common among women in India, and it's relatively, low cost problem to solve.
Yeah.
With a lot of potential benefits.
Yeah.
At the personal level, but also maybe at the firm level.
Yeah.
Mental health. So again, that's probably a huge driver of people quitting.
Yeah.
So then if the cost of all these people leaving is whatever it is, then you should be willing to pay that cost, maybe just under that cost on the interventions. And one future project that we're really excited about, it's not been launched yet, but it's, we're sort of preparing for it. So Shahi has, as part of its 50-year sort of campaign, has decided to introduce a free lunch program.
Yeah.
So again, it sounds quite simple, but the logistics of doing it at this scale are pretty complicated.
Yeah.
It's 100,000 meals a day.
Yeah.
And I think this is an opportunity where GBL can say, firstly, how do we design these meals to optimize nutrition for workers?
Yeah.
And secondly, if Shahi spends, let's say, 80 crores on this, how much do they make back through attendance, retention?
Better health, less illness, and so on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've spoken a lot about the garment industry, but just to shift for a second, we're working with the auto sector.
Yeah.
But one challenge in that industry is that there's really low participation from women.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring them together to say, how can we bring more women into these factories and workplaces? So it's not the traditional way we do research, but it's more of a, I guess, programmatic approach where we're taking insights from past research. We are studying interventions as well.
Yeah.
But the program, the idea is to really say, how do we drive up the participation of women in the sector?
So for a program through GBL, you go with a proposition and then your team designs a solution and then you experiment and you try it out, right? That's how typically it works?
Mostly. I mean, the one step I'll add to that is we often actually get a lot of our ideas, or at least the beginning of ideas, just from being at the workplace, right? Observing, collecting data. And I think now, in the last few years, we've actually created like a design team, but design in the sense like human-centered design.
Yeah.
So the idea is to really put the worker at the center of our programs. And I think the ideal research project for us is something where it's a real problem for businesses and their workers, right?
Yeah.
Like the problem is observable and clear, but it's also something that, from a research point of view, hasn't been solved. Like, for example, the free meal thing.
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but no one's actually done a rigorous evaluation of could it be profitable to give your workers free
for
food?
Businesses, yeah.
Yeah.
You're like a combination of a McKinsey, a good economics department, and an IDEO.
Yeah, actually,
right?
yeah.
And I believe you've got some very good data from, a mental health project that you've run yourself. Do you want to share some of that with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we did the experiment through Good Business Lab and designed the program, but it was run at Shahi. So migrant workers that were joining the company were paired with other migrants who had been working in the company for some time. So you could say like these junior migrant workers were paired with more senior ones. And they were given a set of activities to do together. Senior migrant workers were trained on different aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy and different parts of the activities they were going to do.
Yeah.
And we just concluded the research and we found, like you said, some pretty significant impacts on anxiety and depression. There was a 5 to 6% reduction. And I think this was really encouraging because the buddy system program, as we call it, I remember conceptualizing it early on and thinking, hey, we should create a space for people to build these social networks and get to know each other. But to see how it actually worked and the huge impacts it had was really encouraging. And so this is something, now that we have that evidence, this is something where we can say, let's find ways to scale this up.
5 to 6% is actually huge, right? In terms of, it's very, very good.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the other exciting programs that you've been doing, I think around workers. I mean, you have so many, but just if you can tell us about.
I'll tell you about one in specific that I think is really interesting because this project has gone through almost all the stages. The project is around a topic called worker voice.
Yeah.
So just for some context, if you run a large factory, let's say you have 2,000-3,000 workers in your factory, how do you listen to their feedback, right?
Yeah.
So traditionally, factories will have a suggestion box, a helpline, maybe a committee, all the things that are actually required by the law to have.
Correct.
But there's not a lot of enforcement to see how well you're running these things.
Yeah.
So just as an example of kind of the flaws in some of these traditional channels, grievance channels, think about a suggestion box.
Yeah.
Now, it's placed in the middle of a factory. First of all, someone has to make sure that there's pens and paper so people can actually write the suggestion.
Yeah.
But even if you have all that, there's some maybe anxiety around writing a suggestion and putting it in.
Or being seen when you're putting it in.
Exactly.
Or,
the supervisor might say, hey, what did you say in there? They might call it out.
Yeah.
And no one wants to be in that.
Or open the box. And
I mean, in a worst case, it's not supposed to be like that, but you're right. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
So we realized there's those flaws in the traditional systems, but there's still a need to listen to your workers.
Yeah.
And so we created a tech-enabled solution which allows workers to anonymously share their grievances or feedback. The way it works is there's a phone number, they dial the number, they can leave a voice message, and that voice message can be on anything, any grievance feedback they have. Then there's a case manager, so usually someone in HR, who will listen to the message, transcribe it, and then assign it to the relevant department.
Yeah.
If it's a payroll-related question, it gets assigned there. If it's an HR thing, it gets assigned there. Where maintenance, the AC's not, or the fan's not working in this section. It's really hot over here. The bathrooms aren't clean.
Yeah.
It can be anything like that, all the way to my supervisor's harassing me. And so that allows us to track or trace the grievances that are coming in.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is because we can create more accountability. We can say that, all right, we're going to track how long it takes HR to resolve the case.
Yeah.
We're not going to just leave it open. And we're actually going to provide this feedback back to workers, kind of like a ticketing system.
Yeah.
And I think what's one way to say it is that it's a new way of thinking for businesses, right? It's basically, if a business adopts this solution, they're basically saying that we value the feedback of workers and we want to use it as data to improve. right? We're going to find ways to capture their feedback, understand it, analyze it, and then use it to improve. So if we're hearing a lot of negative feedback around the supervisor, maybe we go in and do a training on some skills that they're missing in terms of management. If we're finding maintenance issues, we try to address them and so on. So the solution's called InAce. That's the name of the tool.
Yeah.
And it's a Kannada word.
Yeah.
It means squirrel.
Wow.
There's a story behind that. But anyways, the point being that it's actually based on, like I said, a lot of evidence. Like we've tested the solution, we've seen the impacts. And now it's a commercially available solution. So any firm that's interested in having this can reach out and we'll provide it to them as low cost as possible. But here's the idea. So why is a nonprofit commercializing tools? It's a good question. But one sort of new area of work is for us to take the solutions that we've tried and tested and have positive impacts, spin them off as these social enterprises,
Completely,
right? And if these solutions really have business impacts, then the market should be willing to pay for them, right?
Completely. And so you can make the money from it and spin it back into the lab, right?
Exactly.
So
you can do all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, so now it's our first attempt at really doing that through InAce, but I think Shahi's implemented the tool. So the tool's already running in 50 factories.
Correct.
It's been stress tested, right?
Yeah.
There are other solutions like this in the market, but oftentimes they are either grassroots solutions or they're solutions that have been developed for the corporate environment that are being adapted.
Not for factory settings.
This has been developed for workers, with workers, using our human-centered design approach. And it's commercially available at as low cost as we possibly
Well, I'm
could.
already going to tell all our Godrej teams which have multiple factories. So you may have your customer number 2. And to everyone listening, this is actually a great example of win-win, right? Where you can do good. You can develop solutions that work. If it works for you, you can share it with the other world. And honestly, I think that's the only way we're going to make significant progress. If we're all not reinventing the wheel, but if someone has, and then they can share it with others so that we don't have to do this labor, we can use our energy in doing something else. So, so thank you for that. Tell me about your team. Like
The team is full of all kinds of people. So the research team would be economists for the most part.
Yeah.
And our field team, they're the ones who are going out in the field, doing the surveys, or training our enumerators to do the surveys, managing all those operations. Because with economics research, a lot of the way you're capturing data is through surveying. And, the data that
and secondary data,
And the data that firms collect. They'll give you like attendance data, this, that. But if you're trying to observe the changes people are experiencing, then a lot of it is through surveying.
By gathering.
I mentioned our design team, so that's more, kind of qualitative work. And I think it's added a lot of value to our organization. But I will say this. So when we started GBL, it was very much focused on creating evidence through research. We realized okay, it's great to have this evidence, but it's just going to sit in journals, in academic journals, unless we do something about it. So that's when we focused on building our marketing or communications team and also partnerships team, really to be able to connect our work with what was going on in the broader business world. And then, of course, the usual functions. You as an NGO, it's one challenge that nonprofits face is proper fund utilization or management. So, we've invested in all of those systems. Now we're 7 years in. So building out the organization in that sense.
And in terms of how it's funded, it's like all 3 of your own, through your organizations, but you're also looking to others to maybe...
Yeah, we have a team that helps raise funds. A lot of it is grant funding, whether it's academic grants or institutional. We have partners we work with. As a not-for-profit, we're able to do research in the most kind of unbiased way. And then make all the learnings accessible to everybody.
And it's all on the Good Business Lab website for anyone who
anyone who wants to do some due diligence, please feel free. It's all online.
What about your own Good Business Lab team itself? How do you practice well-being and self-care within the team?
I think it's something we thought about early on when we were building the organization, right? Where we were saying, if we're going to promote worker well-being in the business world, we have to demonstrate it. Maybe even go the extra mile to, experiment internally and demonstrate what it means. And I think early on, there was a bit of a challenge in kind of finding the balance between how do you build a performance culture, but how do you also prioritize well-being?
Yeah.
We would find ourselves giving higher priority to well-being of workers. But I think as you deal with different situations, you realize that the different ways to think about well-being, right?
Yeah.
Like there's worker well-being, but then, there are managers, the well-being of managers and different levels. But overall, I would say a lot of the best practices that we had seen around the world, whether it was like remote working, even before COVID, now it's much more common, whether it was flexibility on timing, whether it was well-being budgets, the way we recruit, definitely having an emphasis on cultural values and promoting certain types or being deliberate with your culture.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple key things that we try to maintain or embed in, the way we kind of manage our own teams. I think good management is definitely one of them. I think in general, I would say like our managers are sort of trained to have kind of a coaching kind of approach to management. So we would obviously do annual reviews or, we do them twice a year, formal kind of reviews. But then there's also like a monthly development session where managers talk to their team members about their general development goals and their career goals. And it's still a young team, so I think like it's really helpful for people to have the space to have these conversations. And the other thing is trying to find work-life balance, right? Like making sure that work doesn't prevent you from doing all the things that you want to do to like be healthy, sleep enough, work out if you want to, be active.
No, I asked this because our Godrej DI lab is also relatively new, and one of the things we've been saying is as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the world at large, how do we ensure that we practice what we preach within our own team?
What are you learning? Maybe I can pick.
All of everything that you're saying, but I think our greatest, and which is also why we structured ours as a lab, is that the learning possibility in that word is so much more than, say, center, which speaks with a place of authority. Whereas, a lab is a place of play and exploration and possibility. Absolutely. So I think the humility of calling oneself a lab and saying we're always going to learn, we're going to adapt has been very good. And it's also, with our very small team, these are all things that we've learned and we're iterating as we go along.
Are there some workplace policies that your organization has that you think are like stand out as, promoting well-being of workers? Or
we're always looking all around the world and we want to be a little ahead. If you look at care, how we think of care, we think of it as self-care, childcare, and elder care. And in each of these, we've broken it down around various things. So self-care includes mental health and so many other things, right? Elder care will include tying up with facility providers to maybe look after your, the elders in your family and to give you that help in that, right? So whether it's from a policy perspective, whether it's from a benefits perspective, whether it's from coaching, training, sensitizing, we're always striving at a group level to be in line with our values in which we were started, right? Godrej is 127 years old.
Wow.
And how do we always live up to those foundational values in terms of being good, being decent, contributing to the country and to the world at large with that spirit of goodness and decency is something that we're all very conscious of. And when it's a very large group with so many thousands of employees, as you yourself know, you have to constantly re-emphasize because there's always new people coming in.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you attract people in who embody some of these values? How do you keep on articulating these? And how do you, with intent, create this workforce that can take you in? It's something that we're obsessed with. Again, it's been like just a year or so since we started the lab, and we're seeing the changes in India even within this short time frame. We've been thinking of formally with intent, diversity, equity, and inclusion for many, many decades. But the pace of change that we're seeing now is incredible. And the ability to learn from each other and push each other as well. So whether it's the auto sector, whether it's telecom, whether it's the not-for-profit sector, we're always talking to others and we're always learning And we're always sharing. So we also have on our DI Lab website, we have a directory with 500 resources that anyone who wants to be inclusive can, just access and start using. Here's what we found. Let's just go do this together. And that was my question to you, in the 7 years since you've started, what has changed? Like, do you need to explain GBL now to people? Are people seeming more enthusiastic about coming on board and doing these projects to you versus 7 years ago? I would imagine when you started telling people about this, people were like, what?
Yeah. I think it has shifted in terms of how firms sort of react to the ideas we have. Doing an experiment isn't easy in the sense that, like, firms move quickly. They want to make quick decisions. They want to be decisive. They want to sprint,
Yeah.
So there's this sense that you have to grow or die or, all these ideas, traditional ideas.
Yeah.
And I think with research, with the lab, as I'm sure you also can relate to, sometimes the introspection, the learning takes a while to figure out, right?
Yeah.
In particular with research, the PACE program again. 8 months, we're just testing, right? We're collecting the data.
Yeah.
Then you're analyzing the data.
Yeah.
Then you're understanding what the data is saying and finding ways to communicate it. So it can be a long process, right? With this kind of research, we want to establish causality. We want to be able to say that this program caused these impacts. We can say with full certainty.
Yeah.
So I think that's always going to be a bit of a challenge. But like I said, since GBL is really trying to lead businesses to improve the lives of workers, we've also probably gotten better at talking to firms. And, an example is with the auto sector, we've created a consortium. And the idea is it's a gender champions consortium.
Yeah.
So we're bringing together, a handful of auto sector companies, and through joint action or collaboration, really trying to drive this agenda of getting more gender balance in their firms, using the evidence that exists, the evidence that we're creating.
Yeah. And when you do all of these, who pays for it?
I mean, in this case, we actually have a grant from the Gates Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're really interested in this area of work. And they've also now bought into the idea that private sector can help them a lot in achieving the goals that they have. Yeah.
I just want to ask you about how you think of your mission has changed over the years. Because, you did all this work with Shahi, you created impact. Now you've done Good Business Lab, you're creating all this impact. What is your own appetite for your own message and for the work you do? Are you done? Or are you just getting started? Or where are you personally on this journey?
I think it's still the beginning. I mean, obviously in the last 10 years that I've been kind of working in the garment sector, and then now 7 years working on GBL, we've accomplished a lot. I've gotten a lot of clarity on what I want to focus on. I think with Shahi, the opportunity is to say we can grow the business without growing the negative impacts of the business.
Yeah.
And, if we talk about the fashion industry in general, it's considered one of the most polluting industries, because it's employs so many people, specifically women. There's a lot of labor issues that get called out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of also visibility on the industry, right? I think the opportunity for Shahi is to say, let's take all this evidence around what really works and let's try to change this reality.
For everyone who's listening, Anant is very modest. He's the first South Asian supplier to join the Better Buying Institute board, which is a big deal, right?
Yeah, no.
You want to tell us about it? Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good topic as well. So Better Buying is an organization.
It's a global organization.
Yeah. The idea was to say that the purchasing practices of brands and retailers were unequal, unfair at times, and they wanted to create more transparency around that.
Yeah.
Also because a lot of the sustainability goals we have as an industry are being slowed down or prevented because of purchasing practices, right?
Yeah.
If you run a garment factory and you're making clothes for any brand, let's say Gap or Nike or whoever, you make the clothes and you pay for all the costs, right? The labor costs, the raw material costs, the shipping costs. You might spend the shipments on sea. So the goods, from the minute we get the order to when they hit the store and when you get paid, it can be 6 months.
Yeah.
One way to look at it is companies in South Asia or Asia in general or manufacturing countries are financing large corporations in the West, right? Because for 6 months, they can keep the money that they will eventually pay us, and they can do other things with it. The model obviously isn't completely flawed because many companies like Shahi have grown and so on.
Yeah.
But if we look at what happened during COVID, that was really scary. That's when it exposed the issues around purchasing practices. Think about this. So let's say you're booking a hotel.
Yeah.
Now, if you cancel your booking, unless you do it way in advance, there's usually a small fee you pay, right? Brands can cancel their orders without any impacts, and that's what happened during COVID.
Yeah, and even while the ship might just be hitting the port,
we were loading up the shipments and we're getting calls that your orders are canceled. Force majeure is the word we kept hearing.
Yeah.
And, I didn't even know what that word meant before, but now I do. And that's an example of like how vulnerable the sector can be.
Yeah,
unfair.
so you're changing this.
We're trying to.
Yeah.
We're trying to at least put more visibility on it. And the way we're doing it is kind of interesting. So now, Better Buying, what they've been doing is brands sign up, then they facilitate surveys. So suppliers like Shahi will receive a survey that you rate your customer on their purchasing practices.
Excellent. Yeah.
And then the brands get this feedback. So then they kind of see how their customers think of them. And the best brands will actually publicly say, last year our suppliers rated us whatever they did.
Yeah.
And here's what we did to improve. And this year, this is what they, they'll be transparent to that
and
extent.
Customers care about this now.
I don't think it's so much customers, but I think the folks within the industry are paying attention to this. And like I said, if we look at sustainability goals, right? If we say, okay, we want to improve the well-being of workers, we want to decarbonize our supply chains.
Yeah.
All of these things require tons of investment and tons of action, but most of it in the supply chain.
Yeah.
So if your suppliers are struggling and being squeezed and not able to like cover their finances or manage their finances because of payment delays and this and that, how do you even work on phasing coal out or improving the life?
Or treating their workers fairly or giving them lunch or, all of that.
How do you do free lunch? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think for Shahi, fortunately, Good Business Lab has served as a place of a lot of knowledge and evidence and innovation.
Yeah.
So now, even at Shahi, we've built a large team that can focus on these areas more so than the core operations.
Yeah. No, so you said I'm just getting started. So one bit is in this.
I think there's a lot of work to do. I honestly, every day I think about like positive about like the things we've done, but also like sometimes overwhelmed by the amount of challenges we still have to solve.
Yeah. So tell me about some of them. What's the dream project and what would Good Business look like successfully, say 10 years from now?
First of all, the nutrition or free meal program.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. We're on the cusp of hopefully doing this in the next few months. Like think about what impacts you can have by improving the nutrition of women, right?
Yeah.
Of workers in general.
Yeah.
Like it's not only going to affect them, a lot of these women are young.
Yeah.
Maybe they're starting families. They already have kids. So it's going to have intergenerational impact, right? And you can literally create a smarter next generation by working on this right now.
Yeah.
And think about what that means for the country or any country that's doing this. The other area is wages.
Yeah.
So most garment factory jobs pay minimum wage.
Yeah.
Minimum wage, depending where you live, can be 12,000 rupees, 13,000 rupees.
Yeah.
If you're the only person earning in your family and you're only bringing in 13,000 rupees, it's not easy to run a household with that amount of money.
Yeah.
So that's why there's different estimates of what a living wage should be.
Yeah.
But I think often it's like almost double what the minimum wage is.
Correct.
So how do you get there? Like I was telling you, if our business is saying that 30% of our cost is wages and you want to double that cost, suddenly it's 60%, that erases your margin and then you close your business, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's kind of kept people away from working on this, or like people kind of work around this problem or,
Yeah.
But actually increasing wages is a big challenge. We have a experiment ready if anyone listening wants to like help us work on this or has suggestions. But the experiment, it's a wage study.
Yeah.
And it's based on the idea of efficiency wages.
Yeah.
So in economics, there's an idea that you could pay higher than minimum wage.
Yeah.
And it could be profitable.
Yeah.
But let's say Shahi starts paying, instead of 12,000, if that's the minimum wage, we start paying 15,000.
Yeah.
And then as a result, people don't leave anymore.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that extra 3,000 rupees per worker actually drives enough business impact where, like I said, it's profitable.
Yeah.
But the only way to know is through an experiment.
Correct.
So we have an experiment drawn up,
For
loaded
anyone
up, ready.
listening,
Shahi, actually, we proposed this to them and we said, hey, this is what we're thinking. We're trying to bring a brand on board. We're trying to bring a funder on board. I think for Shahi, it was actually, something they were interested and open to. What they needed, which we couldn't make happen at the time, this was a few years ago, they need a brand on board that says, we will guarantee orders for 3 years for the duration of this experiment. And the reason you need that is because you need that stability, right? If you're going to start paying higher. And you also need the orders to flow for you to actualize any efficiency benefits. But we have strong reason to believe that paying more could be profitable. I mean, if you go back in time, the auto sector in the US, I believe Henry Ford famously started paying above market wages. There were lines of people outside his factories to join. They didn't do a randomized control trial, so we don't have the evidence around what that really meant or what it did. In today's world, we can do it, but it requires some partnership. And
and we're already hearing these, say, from Chief Economic Advisor and others in India as well, saying that some of the GDP challenges have come due to lack of consumption, and the lack of consumption is linked to low wages. So higher wages would mean more consumption, would mean a GDP bump and so on. So I mean, we're already hearing these. How to translate that into actions is, I think, one of GBL's challenges, right? Going ahead.
You know what, though? I think now is probably the best time for us to do this because what I'm also seeing on the kind of government policy side is that different states are rolling out incentives to bring in investment into different areas. And one of the incentives we're seeing is like wage subsidies.
Correct.
So some states are saying, if you put a plant in our factory, we'll give you 3,000 rupees subsidy
per worker
on wages for 10 years. Now, if a firm like even Shahi, right, we're talking about this at the leadership level, if we get that 4,000 rupee subsidy, can we then pay a little bit more?
And add it to your work.
And then what would that mean for all the other outcomes?
I love the way that you're thinking about this at Shahi, and I really, really, really love how you've gathered all these thoughts into these experiments that you're doing through the Good Business Lab. I'm so grateful that you chose to set this lab in this hyphenated space, not university, so we can very publicly see some of the thinking and the outputs of the experiments. What gives you hope as you're doing all these things and moving ahead into the future?
Like I said, the power of businesses. How do we harness that for the benefit of society, right? And there's obviously tons of challenges. We've spoken a lot about social issues. We haven't even touched on environmental issues, right? Like we're sitting in Bombay today and the air quality outside is not the greatest. In Delhi, it's, even worse. So we're all suffering the consequences of the damage to the environment that, honestly, corporations have contributed to, right? Mostly.
And need to help solve.
Because here's the thing. If I, as an individual, drive an electric car, don't use plastic, do all the right things, keep my footprint really low, that's not going to move the needle. But if Shahi does it, now we're talking scale, right? Now we're talking impact at scale. And I think the more we kind of find ways for businesses to do these things, to make these investments in ways that make sense, the more quickly we can reach all these development goals. And I think it's also a bit unfair to put the burden on individuals and make us all feel like it's our responsibility for reversing, the negative impacts that we haven't necessarily contributed to that extent. I mean, you can have the same conversation at a national level, right?
Yeah.
You look at the OECD countries and
Yeah.
then the non-OECD countries and so
Yeah.
on. But I'm encouraged at the rate of which, innovation's happening, because things that seemed impossible before are now
Yeah.
looking very real.
Yeah.
And I think that driving growth through sustainability is really exciting, right? Like
Yeah.
sustainability will cost us, absolutely. If you're running a business and you're in it for the long term, I think like that's the right perspective to have, right? Because, you find ways, for example, with solar, if your business uses lots of energy or electricity and you found a way to set up solar, maybe the ROI is longer than 5 years, 6 years. But once you get to that point where you've earned back the cost of setting up your solar panels, now it's like all benefit.
That's all, yeah. Yeah.
And I think like that's what's really exciting, seeing how businesses will actually drive growth through investing in fixing social problems, but environmental ones as well.
So, Anand, I want to ask you this because I know many founders, I know many people who run companies, they're not like you. I've just done this intense seminar in which we've done lots of readings, and there's a theorist called Nell Noddings who's done the theory of care, and she differentiates between caring about and caring for, right? Caring about is, I care about the world, I care about climate change, but you can just care about and do it. Caring for demands a certain kind of attention and commitment, and then working through some of this. You really care for stuff. You're paying attention to it. You're solving some of this. So why are you like this? And why aren't others like you?
That's really flattering. I definitely feel lucky to be in a position where I was connected with our other co-founders. They made me understand a lot of aspects of economics that I didn't really know. And it really sparked an interest in growing the company, because the purpose for Shahi is providing high quality jobs, in particular for rural Indian women.
Yeah.
That purpose can drive a lot of people to continue to want to grow and so on. When you tie it all in with growth, and if you're, have those business ambitions, but understand business holistically in this way, then it doesn't feel like you're caring necessarily. You're caring for growth, but you're looking at it holistically.
Yeah.
And actually, we look at so many companies, Godrej included, and they have such great values and such great perspectives on business. So it's not uncommon. It's just that if we only rely on businesses who have leaders or teams that have these values, then a lot of firms will be left behind when it comes to us transitioning to being more thoughtful about all these things. But with Good Business Lab, the idea is you don't have to care for people necessarily. We don't rely on only leaders who are empathetic and so on. The numbers will motivate you, hopefully. If you care about business, then here's
you
something.
should care about this. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad for you being who you are, because it's actually made such a difference. And I think make friends with PhD students early on in life. Maybe that's another thing as well.
No, I mean, Achin and Anant are definitely, like, I've learned so much from them, but they're also not your usual researchers. They really think about the world and business in so many unique ways. Maybe I would say this, make music. I feel like that helps you balance out the realities of working in a factory or working on these
with what is possible in the world of imagination. Right? And then thank you so much for everything you are and everything you do. Just like with your music, your experiments with Good Business Lab are making the world so much more cooler, so much more better, so much more meaningful. Can't wait to see all the progress that you do in both your music career as well as with Shahi as well as Good Business Lab. I love that your approach is always glass is half full, and there's so much potential in terms of what we can do together. It's one of the reasons why we started this podcast, India included, to together come and as a community, and I use that word wholly and at large, not just for India, but for the world, think of and then solve some of these challenges together. And thank you for leading the way in so many of these with Good Business Lab.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, and it's so great to talk to you. Thanks for the conversation. We also admire the work that you're doing and the perspective you have towards your work and also towards other people's work, right? Just having this conversation is getting me excited about the things that are going on. And yeah, I mean, I definitely feel a shift is happening in the business world, in the world in general. It's been really tough few years in a lot of different ways, through COVID and everything that's happened. But, I'm feeling optimistic about the fact that these problems are real. Like, the issues that we see in the factories and in business and in the world are obviously concerning and real. But I think it's helpful, at least for me, to think of them as exciting challenges that require solutions and, solutions that will last, that are sustainable in themselves.
Yeah.
So that's what's exciting to me. And I think I'm also encouraged by the fact that like these conversations are happening a lot more. I talked to people today and it seems like everyone is quite aware about a lot of the work that's happening in sustainability and quite in tune. So I'm enjoying observing that shift.
Yeah. Thank you. Lots of love. And to everyone listening, all our millions and millions of followers, we love you. Be good. Be cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to India Included. If you enjoyed this episode, tell us. Please subscribe or follow or leave a rating and review on the podcast app you're listening to. To find out more about the work that they do, visit godrejdeilab.com. You can also find them on Instagram and LinkedIn at Godrej DEI Lab. Stay tuned for more.